All right, hello again. Today we're going to talk about something that a lot of people have heard of and probably are aware of, but probably don't know much about the symbolism or meaning of it. It's going to be the tree of life. And we've touched on this a tiny bit, but not really gone into it in any detail. So the tree of life, this is, I think, for the purposes we have today, this is probably the best representation of it. But anyway, we heard some quotes about everything that is on earth has to have its roots in hell in order to grow to the heavens. That sort of quote. I think Jung had a pretty good one, but not really important, the exact one. But anyway, this is Isaac Newton when he translated the Emerald Tablet. This is what it said, and I think this relates pretty closely. So, "'tis true without lying, certain and most true, that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below." So this opposition but similarity. So opposites, it's similar. They're like what's above and below, but obviously the world changes. This one and the one that's in the sky is different as well. So one's reaching upward and there's sort of the central spot there. This has been a pretty good source for a lot of people to explain some spiritual concepts, because it's obviously the tree has a lot of symbolic value, and we see that in so many stories throughout time. But what I want us to focus on first here is something that we've been talking about before, and it's this nested reality situation. So when I explain this, there's going to be so we're talking about the yin and the yang, the two opposites. So let's just sort of draw it like that. So yin and yang. Well, I mean, obviously, I don't want to do all the filling in here, but we get the basic concept here. And there's the two opposites. So what I'm also going to be doing, though, which is going to further complicate it, is there's going to be three levels. So 1, 2, 3. So when we're talking about opposites, you got to think that there's opposites on each level as well. Because, and this is maybe the best example of it, of something this is strictly from mathematics. So this came from that gentleman we were talking about before, Garrett Lisi, and him trying to incorporate every mechanism of the universe into one mathematical concept. And the mathematical concept existed before him, but he tried to apply something, his own physics and his own studies into this already existing concept. And we talked about that with a few other examples as well, where they sort of had something and then they try to fit it. And once it clicks, then everybody just sort of assumes that it's true. But anyway, it's not exactly perfect. There's still some aspects of it that don't perfectly fit, but we can see some of these in their model. We can see, and by the way, this is called E8, and it's a Lie group, which are these mathematical but not really presentable things that are ontologically true but not necessarily physically true. So as a mental concept, they exist, but maybe just as well, not exactly just. I mean, they exist, but their effect on the real world, it's not really what matters in this situation. It's just the fact that they're there and they're giving form to the world, or they're giving sort of they're the rules that the world plays by, or the universe plays by. But anyway, you'll see that they're sort of set up 90 degrees to each other. So we have these, obviously we've used this spiritual symbol a lot with the two opposing triangles. And we can see a third one in here. So just like that. And this is something that's pretty consistent with all we've talked about so far. And then we can actually see it in nature as well. So you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit for the third one. But we can see one here. And then I'd like to get rid of that. Let's just go to the next thing. And then if you zoom in, so this is a zoomed in version, you can see the little version here as well. So you can go back and forth, and you can see that these things represent themselves in the natural world as well. I mean, no two snowflakes are the same, but there's this basic pattern. And the shape of the snowflakes sort of meet or match the way when they go through this model, like it was a computer model they've set up. And if you go through it, it's almost like watching different snowflakes. These are going through, and it's doing like sort of an MRI thing, where it's taking slices as it goes, and it goes through the model, and they all look different. But here's a good example of one that looks just like a snowflake. There's a lot of different depictions of this. So keep in mind, we're talking about 3s and 2s. So we 2 opposites, but 3s in the physical world. So this is, by the way, this is the tree of life. If you look at it in the Kabbalah belief system and the way they do it. So we can see these 2 circles here, and then there's one part of the circle that's outside of it. So I might talk about that eventually as well. Sometimes they put another circle here and another circle here, but that's not important for what we're talking about. But what is important is getting some congruence, what we've talked about with a lot of different concepts. So these triquettas, you can see the little one inside, and it's opposed to the one outside. But you see the circle as well, so this is all fitting into a circle. We've talked about the philosopher's stone right from the very first lesson, how it fits into this with the triangle and the square all fit into this world in here. And we have the 2 opposites, but keep in mind all this stuff, so this 2 opposite tree is this version. Now, try to stay with me here. This is pretty tricky. So, like I say, most stories start after this line. And not exactly that, but they start this one with the world. So they leave out the rest of that, and then they start here and sort of repeat the process that happened to make 1 into 2, make 1 into 2, but the 2 in this case became something else, the square, what's made of the world. So we mentioned that the square is these 4 when they're fit together, and being water. So water was the first element down. But anyway, the water is going to be important, and that's what we're getting at right now. But think of this as the repeating process of this, but this part isn't mentioned in most stories. So 1 becoming 2, and in this case, there's 2 that there's a mirror between. They're exactly the same as each other. The only difference is that 1 was the source, and 1 is the effect. This is the base of cause and effect and of reason. We're going to relate this to, like I say, the water, and I'm going to say this is why we're also attracted to this story of Narcissus staring into the water. Keep in mind, if 2 things are exactly the same and dependent upon each other, and they can look into, and think of it like a mirror. So let's say this one makes another one, and they sort of see each other. One is dependent. You can't, even if this one can think, it can't move out of the image of the other. So he could try to move, but his existence is dependent upon this one. So this is the reality, always true, will never change. What is here. We've been talking about the torus representing something that's made up and being like a dream. And this is exactly what we're talking about. So it starts with darkness, and then water, and then it sees, or the entity sees itself in the water, sees its reflection, and the reflection is this. So this is a cultural consistent through all cultures. This is the Japanese concept. So 2 fishes are dolphins biting each other's tail. There's these 2 opposites. So we have a sort of a 6 and a 9 situation. So they see each other, but they're opposites of each other. So they're mirror image of one another. If one is good, one is bad. They have to balance each other out because they're the opposite of one another. Just like when you look into a mirror, you're seeing your reflected image back is opposite. So this is basically yin yang, right? So the 2 opposites that are not separate, but represent themselves as separate because they're dependent upon another half. And that goes back to the circles that we talked about before. That goes back to this. They're dependent. This one is dependent on this one. just as this one is, this one is dependent on this one. But remember, it made something different here. That was something important too. But that is the same as a torus. We talked about a donut shape being the same as a square when you do it mathematically. And I know this all seems unbelievable, but try to stay with me because there's a lot here. Anyway, so when we look at our figure in the water, we see the opposite of it. So if whatever you think of oneself, you'll see the opposite in the image. This goes back to that tree we talked about before. The reflection of the top part of in hell and part in the heavens, and those two opposing each other. So we're going to leave that there today. This is going to be a little bit of a shorter one, and we're going to use this because this tree is usually represented in a lot of different stories. And here we see Adam and Eve, and then we see the tree. And we mentioned before, the first time we talked about the snake, this is a symbol for death. So the snake being always shown in a lot of the infinity symbols, and that's no coincidence. So biting its own tail. So we see one here biting, well, not see one here, but my depiction of one biting its own tail in this is the torus one. And we also see one in a circle sometimes too, biting its own tail, but different. These represent two different things. And by the way, this is mathematically and in physics something that is consistent in what is shown there as well. So there's some things that require 360 degree. I might have talked about this already, but then there's some things that require 720. If you're going to explain how mechanically the universe and the world at large, especially on the minute level, how it reacts and how it responds. So again, we'll leave it there for today, but I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that you're kind of following this, although it's not easy to understand and it's harder to accept. So far harder to accept than it is to understand. I'd say logically, most people can follow it detached from themselves, but it's very difficult to apply it to yourself, because this is something that represents a lot of fear for all of us. But it shouldn't. And I hope you can hear that in my voice, that there's nothing to be afraid of in this moment, or in this system, or understanding this. So I hope that's something that people keep in mind as well. But anyway, we will talk to you guys soon.